Thank you, Steve. When I got the call, the telephone call to see if I would come down to talk with you guys about the subjects we're going to be talking about tonight, I had just gotten back into my office up in Santa Cruz from a 10-day trip in Washington, D.C. In my former capacity as chief counsel for the Jesuit, the national headquarters in Washington, D.C., and co-director of their National Social Ministry Office, I was meeting with the heads of the 54 major religious denominations in the country to try to draw them into supporting the passage of the Green New Deal. Our office is drafting that. Our office is actually drafting the full body of the California Green New Deal, expanding on the 9-page memo that has been introduced into Congress. We're now at 450 pages of the Green New Deal with 30 separate sections that I was in Washington, D.C. meeting with them, and I came back into my office to find my first invitation for my 50th reunion at Harvard Law School. And it sort of then struck me that I'd been practicing now for 50 years, and it didn't really seem like that. That and the fact that virtually all the people that I knew in Washington, D.C., when I was there for 20 years, had now retired when I went in to meet with them, and I was meeting an entirely new generation of the leaders of the major denominations. These two facts together sort of got me thinking about the various types of cases I've worked on down through the years and the history that I've had specifically with this issue of the UFO phenomenon and the potential existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. And Steve was gracious enough to go over some of the background, the history that I've had in this particular area, which actually began, as he pointed out, with President Jimmy Carter. When I was at the Jesuit National Headquarters back in 1975, Jimmy Carter was one of the candidates for the nomination for president. And I happened to, as the chief counsel of the Jesuits, I organized a meeting of the heads of the 54 religious denominations to meet with him, to talk with him about what policies he would implement if and when he became president. And it was in that meeting that we actually got him to agree that if he were elected president, he would cut off all military funding to any foreign dictator that was shown to be systematically violating the human rights of his own citizens. And when he became president, he actually implemented that in an executive order. And pursuant to that executive order, he cut off all the military funding to Anastasio Somoza, the longtime dictator in Nicaragua, and then cut off all military funding to the Shah of Iran. Both of those governments fell within 6 months of the cutting off of U.S. military aid to both of them, thereby leading to the Iran-Contra scandal, which we later filed the major federal criminal racketeering lawsuit against the people that were attempting to sustain those authoritarian governments in power behind the scenes. Because of that contact with Jimmy Carter early on and getting him to implement that executive order, when he was elected president, I was having a meeting with Rosemary Chalk. Rosie Chalk was the executive secretary of the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., and I was having a lunch with her, and she was commenting on the cases that I'd done up to that point in time. I'd done the case that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources all the way to the Supreme Court. I did the Iran-Contra case, as Steve pointed out. We had done the Pentagon Papers case, representing the New York Times to get them to publish all 47 volumes of the classified top secret documents in internal cable traffic showing the lies that were undergirding the Vietnam War, including the falsification of the Bay of Tonkin incident, etc. So I was reflecting upon these 50 years of the work that I've been doing in this area and started to reflect upon what I should talk about with you. And it dawned on me that I am one of the comparatively few septuagenarians that are actually involved in the UFO and ET issue right now. That we've recently, as you know, lost Stanton Friedman this past May, and just prior to that, Bob Dean last October, and Bud Hopkins had died recently. We lost Wendell Stevens, and of course Dr. John Mack. And I was reflecting upon all these people that I've known very, very well over all the years, and realized that there's just sort of a comparative handful of us that have actually been involved in this issue that are actually in their 70s now. And there's a number of them. Jacques Vallée is still active, Whitney Strebler, David Jacobs, Grant Cameron, and Barbara Lamb, who of course is ageless. And there are others, Timothy Good. The senior of all of us is, of course, Eric von Daniken, who is still at it. And I won't include Linda Moulton Howe because, as everyone knows, she's perpetually 39 years old. But she's been around for a while. So I realized that most of these folks are gone, and I have, in my lifetime, I've actually witnessed and experienced the evolution of this issue, of the extraterrestrial issue and the UFO issue, from its origins with Donald Kehoe at the very beginning in the 1940s when I was just a little kid. And it was this kind of mysterious new issue that kind of, because the Roswell stuff hadn't really been publicly revealed other than that little buzz, right in July of 1947 when I was only 2 years old. But it kind of quelled that because they lied about what it really was and it had covered it up. But when Donald Kehoe started writing articles in True Magazine and others about this kind of interesting, kind of magical issue kind of began to seize the public imagination. And then in the 1950s, we saw a whole series of these science fiction movies coming out about this. And they ranged all the way from the kind of progressive and fairly optimistic things like The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original, not with Keanu Reeves, but with Michael Rennie. But that whole thing showing that the extraterrestrial beings cared about us and wanted us to try to avoid nuclear war, etc. And there were others that were kind of in between, like This Island Earth, where a foreign, an off-world had come to us because their entire ecological system was collapsing, and they were coming here to try to get scientists to help them try to figure out what to do about it. And others that were a little bit more frightening, like War of the Worlds, the big movie, the original movie with Gene Barry, not the one with Tom Cruise. But there were a whole spate of these movies in the 1950s that were on again, off again, talking about how our development of thermonuclear weapons was actually attracting these extraterrestrial beings to try to come and warn us. There were a lot of these movies that were around at the time. And then in the 60s, we began to develop this kind of a new dimension to this abduction phenomenon. The classic originals of this with Betty and Barney Hill, 1961, Fuller's book on the incident at Exeter. People began to talk about this extraordinary new dimension. It wasn't just lights in the sky or even these saucers kind of flashing by, and nobody at that time had cell phones or they weren't carrying cameras around, so they were just giving their own personal testimony about this. And even though there were police officers and librarians and lawyers, which everybody believes all the time, testifying about these things, nobody wanted to believe it. But there was this issue now of the abductions. And what we began to hear is that the people who were experiencing this phenomenon, Barbara Lamb has confirmed this, and John Mack had confirmed it to me, is that the vast majority of these people, upwards of 70% of these people, reported that there were communications being undertaken to them during this abduction experience, in which the extraterrestrial beings were trying to warn us about what we were doing to our environment. They kept referring to it as polluting our planet, that we were endangering the life systems of our planet, and that we had to stop doing this. And there were some very dramatic stories about people being brought up into these craft and shown these great big kind of plasma screens where it showed our planet with the entire ecological system had collapsed, and things were dying everywhere, and there wasn't enough oxygen for people, and the temperatures had gone sky high and were killing all the life forms. And this was a phenomenon that occurred in the 1960s, and there began to be a growing demand on the part of the people that our United States government, specifically the executive branch, disclosed to us what they knew about this. This was the beginning of the disclosure movement, where we as citizens were coming kind of hat in hand to the executive branches of government, asking them to tell us what was really going on. And there began to develop this whole theory that there was this dark conspiracy on the part of our executive branch, these mysterious people that were showing up at these ET sightings and suppressing all the information and threatening people, et cetera. And there developed this dynamic in the early 60s about this nefarious quality of our government's relationship with this issue. And so that gave birth to the beginning of these kind of self-help programs, this self-discovery and self-disclosure set of projects that it began, I guess, with NICAP. Early on, 1956, NICAP was that's probably before a lot of your time. You probably don't even know what NICAP was, but it was the National Investigating Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. And this presaged the beginning of MUFON. And MUFON actually began in 1969 as the Midwest UFO network in 1969. And it evolved into the kind of national level MUFON that it is today. And so this has been the evolution of this entire issue that's taken place during my lifetime. And now there's a great feeling afoot, which I think is justified, that we've entered into a new and unique period of this entire issue of the ET phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon. We now have a series of events, I think 3 major events that I would just highlight here tonight that have brought on this kind of new era. The first one was the launching into space of our space-borne telescopes with the Hubble and then the Planck and then the Kepler and now the Webb telescope that's going to be going up. It's a little bit delayed, but it's going to be going up this next year. And what's happened is now, for the very first time, the scientific community has finally acknowledged that there are other planets than the ones in our solar system. Now this is a product of their rapidly inductive process that until such time as they have seen something, touched it, smelled it, weighed it, measured it, it doesn't exist. So that you would actually talk to intelligent, well-educated scientists who would tell you that they didn't think there were other planets, that there were all these billions of stars, and that we happen to be the only star that had planets around it. But the Hubble began the process, and they began to discover just by the fact that these stars, that once they got a stationary telescope, that could focus on a particular star and leave it right there for weeks on end, they could actually see the sun, of the star, dim. And they concluded that it was because there was a planet that was going in front of it, between the telescope lens and the star. And so they were saying, you know, eureka, it appears that this is a planet. And that now what they've discovered is that they've got the telescopes now, some land-based, but now the Webb is going to go up, and they're going to actually be able to block out the glare of the star so that they're going to be able to see the planet actually come around the star. And they're going to be able to see it, and they're going to be able to photograph it digitally, and they're going to be able to put the spectroscopic light reflected from the planet through a spectroscope and analyze what the makeup of the atmosphere is there. And they're going to eventually be able to actually photograph the surface of these planets. Now this is an extraordinary development in the history of this issue of potential life elsewhere, because they're starting to discover a number of these stars that have the planets around them, that have these stars, as you know, some of the planets are in what they call the Goldilocks zone. This is that it's not too far away from the sun to be too cold, it's not too close to their sun to be too hot, it's just right, like the porridge in Goldilocks. And so that therefore there could be life on these, they could be life-generating planets. And so what's happened is that very interestingly, on November 11th, it's a date that you should remember, November 11th of 2011, the Vatican convened a set of meetings with world scientists at Castel Gandolfo, just outside of Rome, outside of the Vatican. And they were astrobiologists and astrophysicists, et cetera, and they had a long series of meetings, and the leadership of the church was there, including Benedict and the Pope at the time, and they came back and they issued a formal public statement from the Vatican in the press room of the Vatican in Rome that Father Jose Gabriel Funes, the then director of the Pontifical Observatory, issued the public statement saying that in light of the discovery of more and more of these exoplanets and the discovery of some of the planets that appear to have the potential for having life, that it now appears that much sooner than had ever been expected, we are going to discover life elsewhere in the universe. And therefore, the time has arrived for the people of our planet to begin a very serious discussion of the profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by our potential discovery of life elsewhere. Now, because of my position as the legal counsel for the Jesuit order in the United States earlier, I reached out and contacted Jose Gabriel Funes right away, was given a meeting with him and sat down with him, and within 2 minutes he explicitly acknowledged that he was talking about highly intelligent and highly technologically developed intelligence. He's not talking about amoebas or microscopic, life forms. He's talking about what the philosophical and theological questions are that are going to be posed to our human family by the discovery of another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed but distinctly non-human species elsewhere in the universe. And that he wants this discussion to start, which means that the church wants this discussion to start, which means that the Jesuits want this discussion to start, which means that I want this discussion to start, which means that you want this discussion to start as well. Okay? And of course, now the second major event that has occurred, of course, as you remember, on December 16th of 2017, the New York Times published on the front page the story of the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Evaluation or Investigation Project, ATIP, inside the United States Pentagon. and the creation of this new To the Stars Academy, where an entire cadre of personnel previously inside various intelligence agencies, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, NSA, a whole series of them, all came out and retired suddenly, and have all now gotten religion, as it were, and have decided that they're going to form the To the Stars Academy, and they're going to acknowledge that the United States Pentagon and the Defense Department has concluded that UFOs are real. And they've actually released, with permission of the United States Defense Department, gun camera, not ironically, gun camera footage of these UFOs that have been captured by F-18 Hornets that have tracked them and videoed them. And they actually went so far as to talk in some detail about the phenomenon going on just a few hundred miles off the coast here, southwest of here, between here in Guadalupe Island, just due west of Baja, California, where the USS Nimitz and an entire battle group is basically stationed now monitoring this location where hundreds of these UFOs have been seen coming in at like 60,000 feet and moving within 1 second down to the very surface of the ocean, and then going into the water and continuing to be monitored by submarine radar at over 100 miles an hour underwater. And this is going on regularly. And now the radar technicians from the USS Nimitz and others have now come forward and are testifying openly about their experience with this phenomenon. And the To the Stars Academy has now started issuing public statements, and Lou Alessandro, who was the director of the project inside the Pentagon, is now going around saying things like, we now know that the UFOs are real, we know that they are not Russian, we know that they are not Chinese, and we know that they are not ours, but we don't know where they come from. And it's like he said, and he says this over and over again, it's as if you lock all of your doors and all of your windows before going to bed, and you wake up the next morning and you find muddy boot prints across the rug in your living room. You know that something is going on, but you don't know what it is. And so theoretically, the To the Stars Academy has been founded by these people, Jim Simivan, the longtime director of covert operations for the Central Intelligence Agency domestically, which in and of itself is totally against the law, since they're not allowed to function inside the United States. And Hal Puthoff and others that are all involved in this. And they are engaged in a two-step, a big step with us, confirming in a semi-official way now that UFOs are real, but trying to get all of us to perceive the phenomenon as a threat. Now, this is something that we in the UFO community have been anticipating for some time now, because this is the absolute dream of the national security state. They're panicking over the fact that they lost the Soviet Union on December 31st of 1991 as their ultimate other that they've been using for 75 years to justify $700 billion a year military budgets. And so that they were scrambling to try to figure out who the new other was going to be. They then invaded and occupied the Middle Eastern oil fields under George Bush Sr. and Jr. and said, oh, you're right, we were wrong that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, but as long as we're there, we might as well keep the oil fields ourselves. And then now we find Putin having these interesting conversations with Donald Trump in which they're actually negotiating about how to establish a partnership between the Russian oil corporation, which is called Rosneft, that actually has access to all of the oil under the Black Sea and the natural gas under the Caspian Sea, and access to some 87 billion barrels of oil under the Arctic shelf that's within the 15-mile zone that Russia claims of its own in the Arctic. The only challenge is they have to have increased global climate change to melt the ice so that they can get at those 87 billion barrels. And we know that there has recently been uncovered an attempt to sell 20% interest in Rosneft to some mysterious group called the Intergroup Trust, okay? And no one knows who that is. The Intergroup Trust is got a little building that it has down in the Cayman Islands, and the only other office in that is BlackRock Financial Investments, which a fellow by the name of Pete Peters is a partner in, along with Stephen Schwarzmore, who is in fact a financial advisor to Donald Trump. And it turns out that the person who's been negotiating for the potential purchase of this 20% interest is none other than Carter Page, who is the first man who was placed under surveillance by the CIA and the FBI as part of the Trump campaign staff. So there's this effort now to have the Russians and the United States oil companies form a partnership of controlling monopoly control over the oil in North America and in Russia to hold it away from China so that they can delay the rise of the great Asian empire. Now, this has been discussed at some length by Samuel Huntington. Samuel Huntington was the president of the American Association of Political Science. No slouch, this guy, and was the editor of the Council on Foreign Relations Foreign Affairs magazine, where he published an article right at the end of the Cold War, openly advocating that the United States, at the end of the Cold War, rather than cutting back on our major military spending, instead increase our military spending so that we could establish full spectrum dominance over the entire planet. And that is what we're dealing with here, because there is a obvious plan afoot to have China be the ultimate other that's going to replace Russia as a major stimulant for the massive military spending to maintain the military-industrial complex. But waiting in the wings is the great ultimate other. And this is the extraterrestrial civilization that is being perceived by the national security state bureaucracy as the golden goose that will forever be laying golden eggs for the military-industrial complex. And the To the Stars Academy is right in the forefront of attempting to stimulate a consciousness on the part of the American people, at one and the same time initially revealing that the United States Defense Department and Pentagon recognize the reality of UFOs, pretending that they don't know where they come from, but they need to be investigated as a potential threat to the national security of our planet. So that this effort that's going on now is a double-edged sword. It, at one and the same time, causes a major giant step on the eve of the celebration of the landing on the moon tonight. One giant step for mankind, recognizing the existence of the UFOs as real, but it is potentially one giant step backwards into the national security state that we need to be concerned about. So therefore, we have to be cognizant of what it is that's going on now. But the fact is that the time has arrived for us to turn our attention as the UFO community and the ET community and the paranormal community, research and investigating community, that is investigating the kind of paranormal dimensions of these experiences that people are having with the UFOs and the ETs, to begin to have this discussion, a discussion of the profound philosophical, theological, psychological, sociological, and public policy implications of the fact of there being an extraterrestrial civilization. And that we have put off these questions in a long period, first of trying to discover if it was true, that they actually exist, and then trying to spend all of our time getting the executive branch to reveal it to us, and now all of our time trying to get them to communicate with us, okay? Rather than starting to answer these profound questions that are presented to our human family by the fact that we now know they exist. Now, I want to be clear about the fact that I'm not suggesting that everybody stop trying to get the answer to the question to verify that the ET people are real. Well, I don't think we should all walk away from that issue, because there are still many millions of people who don't yet believe it because they've been told for so long by authorities that it doesn't exist. So that's a valuable undertaking, and I don't mean to say that they should in fact abandon their effort to get the Congress of the United States to investigate this. And I don't mean to suggest that we should abandon trying to figure out where these beings are coming from or what their civilization may be like. And very importantly, I don't mean to suggest that we should abandon entirely the investigation of the question about what the national security implications are of the existence of this extraterrestrial civilization. I do think that needs to be kept on a fairly short leash, but what I am advocating is that the time has now arrived for those of us in the ET community and the UFO community to begin together addressing these questions, these profound philosophical, theological, psychological, sociological, and in this group, metaphysical questions that are posed, as well as the public policy steps that should be taken by our people collectively to head off this effort on the part of the military-industrial complex to turn this issue into the fatted calf for themselves and to try to superimpose a national security state over our planet in some kind of one world government coming together to protect us against the repercussions of an extraterrestrial civilization. A large portion of which repercussions might be the people that are in positions of power right now might not remain in power. And they know that. They realize that if for them to maintain their control, this elite 1% of the population over the rest of the people of the world, somehow selling the theory that it's okay for them to possess 40% of all the resources of the world, more than all the rest of the people of the world together, this is a major danger. So the issue, I think, is not so much that we need to answer these profound philosophical and theological and other questions in order to show that it's okay for the government to disclose to us the fact that the extraterrestrial civilization exists. Rather, I think we need to answer these questions for ourselves so that the extraterrestrial civilization will reveal itself to us. Because, I mean, it's a strange phenomenon in our community. We're constantly complaining about the fact that the executive branch doesn't tell us, that the Congress won't investigate it, and we keep just blinking the fact that the extraterrestrial civilization itself doesn't tell us. Doesn't just come and say, look, here we are, and get used to it. So obviously there is a dynamic going on within the extraterrestrial civilization itself that is causing them to pause in simply making themselves known to us. And so and it isn't, I think, that like the national security state says that we're all going to go and run and jump out a first-story window, when we find out about this, whether we're all going to cast aside all of our religious beliefs or anything. That it's clear that the national security state has an ulterior motive to try to preserve and protect the elite that are in power right now. Okay, but the question as to why it is that the extraterrestrial civilization itself will not openly come forward and reach out to us and establish open communications with us is a very important question that we have to answer. And it appears to me to be the fact that they're not certain that we are ready, really, to have a measured and intelligent response to them. And so that I want to, the time that we have here tonight, what I want to do is I want to start identifying some of these important philosophical questions, some of the important theological questions and psychological questions, so that we can undertake this discussion among ourselves. We don't have to be, choreographed by the government. We don't have to be told what to do by the national security state. We don't even have to be told what to do by the extraterrestrial civilization. We need to decide ourselves what we think the range of answers are to these fundamental questions, so we can prepare ourselves for being worthy to participate in whatever this civilization is that exists outside our Earth. And very importantly, we, I think, need to answer some of these important questions in order to effectively address some of these warnings that they've been giving us over the last 50 years. We now are confronted by the reality of the global climate change. There's debates going on about to what degree human conduct is causing them, and to what degree the fossil fuel industry is responsible for this, et cetera. But it's perfectly clear that there's very peculiar things going on now, and there's massive scientific evidence showing that there is a substantial contribution to this process by the burning of fossil fuels. And so that what we want to do is we want to be able to, it's in light of the fact that our office is in the process of drafting the California Green New Deal statute. We are having to cope with every day, how we get this communicated to different constituencies in the state of California so that they are open to doing the stuff that's necessary, because it's going to require some significant changes in attitude, changes in lifestyle, et cetera. And there's some temporary period that we're going to have to go through here to get shifted over into sustainable, clean energy sources. And so that this discussion has a very practical edge to it, to really try to figure out what the answers to these questions are, so that we can approach the different constituencies in our human family with what we understand to be the answers to these questions, so that they're not so frightened, so that they're not so into holding onto the woodwork, no matter how inadequate they find it, because they at least know what it is, because they don't know what the other future holds for them. So that we have to answer these questions. So what I wanted to do in the time that we have, and then have some questions and answers on this, is that I want to approach this in a systemic way. That most people, when you say to them, what are the profound philosophical questions that are posed to us by the actual confirmation of the existence of another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed but distinctly non-human species right in our own galaxy? What do we mean when we say, what are the philosophical questions that are asked? Most people would immediately start throwing out a whole bunch of questions. I mean, because there are myriad questions that arise. You can say, where the hell are these people from? Or how much like us are they? Or what do they really believe? Or what are they doing here? Or how are their vehicles propelled? Can we get them to help us with global climate change by giving us an alternative source? You start tossing out these questions all over the place in this kind of haphazard way, And then there's some more subtle and profound questions is, what has this got to do with consciousness? Why is it that some people seem to attract these experiences and others don't? What's going on here? Why is it you can go out with 100 people out into a field and spend all night and nothing happens, and you bring a particular person or different people with you, and it'll happen right lickety-bang like that? What's going on there? You know, there's all kinds of these questions that we can ask ourselves, but if we undertake that process in kind of a haphazard, willy-nilly manner, you aren't going to be able to figure out what the pattern is of the answers that you have. So what I'd like to point out to you right now is that most people don't have any real idea where philosophies come from or exactly what they are. Most people know that there's such a thing as philosophers and that they seem to be engaged in all kinds of fanciful conversations of, you know, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin and all of that stuff. But they don't really know what it is. I had this same problem when I was out practicing law for a number of years after graduating from Harvard Law School. I kept having these big run-ins with the senior partners in the big law firm. I went down to this #1 litigation law firm in the world down on Wall Street. And even though I did the Pentagon Papers case and did the case establishing the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources, et cetera, the senior partners were still quite distressed over the fact that I would, for example, defend the Black Panthers because the top 21 leaders of the Black Panther Party had been arrested and charged with 157 separate crimes, like planning to blow up the Statue of Liberty on the 4th of July and burn down Macy's and Gimbel's on Thanksgiving Day, and a whole series of these rather macabre accusations that were made against them. And it turns out that I was asked to participate in their defense. And here I was at this big silk stocking law firm representing all these major corporations. And I had an agreement with them as a condition for agreeing to go to work for them off the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review that I would get to spend 50% of my time doing public interest cases. Well, of course, they thought that meant, like, you know, suing a fly-by-night furniture company that is getting set to foreclose on some poor family after they've paid all but their last payment on their couch. You know, whereas in fact I was asked to help defend the Panther 21, and so I sent out a memo to all 178 trial lawyers in our firm, telling them that I'd been asked to help participate in this defense and asking how many other people wanted to cooperate and participate in this. Of course, I didn't get a single response to this. I went forward with our other team of people, and we did the defense of the Black Panther 21. And after 18 weeks, it took the jury 33 minutes to come up with 157 innocent verdicts. And everybody jumped up and started celebrating in the courtroom, and Judge Murtaugh started pounding his gavel and screaming and hollering, telling everybody to sit down. There's no such thing as an innocent verdict, he said. There is either guilty or not guilty. And you're to go back into that jury room, and you're to come out with either, you know, 157 not guilty verdicts or guilty. And they went back into the room and came out in 8 minutes with 157 innocent verdicts. Again. And so the jury leaped out of the box and ran across the courtroom and started hugging on the defendants, jumping up and down. And I remember ABC, Howard K. Smith, came over and interviewed me and said, well, Mr. Sheehan, you know, you guys have all been complaining that the legal system doesn't really work, and now doesn't this really prove that it works? And so I said, well, you know, if you've had, you know, 21 completely innocent people in prison, you know, for 18 weeks, and it took a jury only a half an hour to find them all completely innocent, and they defied the judge to insist on the fact that they were innocent. If that's what you mean by working, then it certainly is working. Well, it turns out that the partners in the law firm didn't take kindly to that. They thought that it was somehow challenging the fundamental justice system, which was good for them to notice. Things like that kept happening, and so I was asked to leave the firm. They determined that quote, my interest and the interests of their clients was not the same, which again was pretty insightful on their part. And so I went to work for F. Lee Bailey. who was the #1 criminal defense attorney in the country, just in time to be there to represent the people in the Watergate burglary. And we represented James McCord, who was the CIA wiretapping specialist, who actually wrote the letter to Judge Sirica blowing the whistle on Richard Nixon and the plumbers that led to his resignation. But I had this trouble with Bailey. I kept trying to get Bailey to do public interest cases, to help do things, and so I was asked to go out by ACLU to be amicus counsel at the occupation at Wounded Knee back in 1973 in May. And so I was out there working with them, and I came back after 2 weeks of taking a vacation to go out there. And I came back, and Lee Bailey called me and said, Danny, he called me on the phone. He said, Danny, come on in here to my office. He said, I understand you were out at Wounded Knee for the last 2 weeks. I said, yeah, I was there. He says, come on in. So I went into his office, and he said, which side were you on out there? I said, well, really, I was negotiating, trying to get foodstuffs in and try to see if we could get some settlement without everybody shooting each other out there. And he said, what the hell good does that do us? He said, you know, if you'd gone on the side of the FBI and the Justice Department, at least we could have earned some goodwill with them, and then I could have sent you in to negotiate like a better deal for one of the Angiulo brothers, who are the mafia in the north end of Boston, you know? And so I realized that we were kind of on different wavelengths about this. And so anyway, it's a long story, but that month, or that weekend, I was coming back from church, and I stopped in at this bookstore. I was talking with Steve about this in the car on the way over, and I found a copy of a book by John Rawls, who is the chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard University. And he had written this book called A Theory of Justice. And he was going to try to do an examination of the entire concept of justice in Western civilization. And he thought that he was going to come to the root understanding that in a democracy, when a collective democracy is confronted by different public policy problems, they're going to look at the number of options they have to try to address that, and they're going to choose that which generates the greatest good for the greatest number. That makes perfect sense. That's the kind of classic, utilitarian, majoritarian mode of ethical reasoning. But he discovered it wasn't true. He said, because if this were true, as he put in the book, he said, why is it that the 90% of the people in the country that are white don't still own the 10% that are black? Because there's this other thing going on in the country. There's this whole group of people that he referred to as the intuitionists. The intuitionists keep saying things like all men are created equal and they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights and the right to free speech and the right to free press and all of this. And he said, so there's this whole other element functioning in the culture that offsets a strictly utilitarian, majoritarian decision. And so I said, oh, great. I said, this must be the answer to this, that I wasn't able to really explain to Lee Bailey or to the senior partners, Larry McKay and the others at the Cahill firm. And so I get a copy of the book, I read it that weekend, and I call him up on Monday. I got on the telephone with his secretary, and I said, hi, I said, this is Danny Sheehan. I went to Harvard College, Harvard Law School, waving my school tie through the phone to see if I could get a chance to have a meeting with him, right? And so he agrees that I can have like a 15-minute meeting with him that Wednesday. So I go in and I sit down with him. So I start talking to him about the kind of cases I've done and things that I've been doing. And he's kind of flabbergasted that anybody who's doing those kind of cases for the New York Times and all these things, cares about these kind of abstract philosophical questions. And so he ends up asking me to come back to Harvard to do a PhD in the field of comparative social ethics, to evaluate the difference between majoritarian utilitarianism and this intuitionism. And so I did. I came back. And I signed up and I went back in that fall. And I thought I was going to be in the Department of Philosophy. And it turns out they've got me over at the Divinity School. Because it turns out that Dr. Ralph Potter, who teaches comparative social ethics at Harvard, is based in the faculty at the Divinity School. So I ended up getting enrolled in the Masters of Divinity course. And I found out something there that I want to share with you, which is, I'd gotten an honors graduate from Harvard College and a graduate from the law school, and no one had ever told me this. But it turns out that at Harvard University, they believe, and they view themselves as the seat of the liberal ethics. Western civilization by their own lights, and that they believe that when in fact our human family is confronted with any given public policy challenge, we will divide ourselves into different factions. Talcott Parsons, who was the founder of the Department of Sociology at Harvard University, explicated this and said that there are 5 different nodal points on this spectrum of beliefs, which is the left-right sociological bar graph, where left-wingers come from and right-wingers come from. This is where it comes from Talcott Parsons' sociological bar graph, where he locates these different groups along the spectrum. And so I started doing my PhD thesis, my master's thesis first, on this issue. I came to discover that there are actually 7 different worldviews. They'd left out 2 of them. And I put this into my thesis and was working on it and ended up getting recruited to actually become chief counsel of the United States Jesuit Order, to help them analyze public policy problems and stuff using this particular methodology. So I wanted to share it with you tonight because this is where philosophies come from, okay? And so that if you're going to start asking and trying to answer some of these profound philosophical questions that are posed to us as a human family by our discovery of the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization, here's what you need to know. That there are, as it turns out, 4 fundamental, what are referred to as pillar questions, fundamental pillar questions that our human family is confronted by, and that they are set forth in what has come to be known as Potter's box. This is from Ralph Potter, the professor that I was telling you about. He was the protege of Professor Talcott Parsons, who was the head of the Department of Sociology at Harvard for about 40 years. What he said is there are 4 fundamental pillar questions that every single woman and man has to at least unconsciously answer, or at least subconsciously answer for themselves in order to be able to cope with reality. The first one is what they call the cosmological question. And this is, how did the universe come into being anyhow? You know, what are we all doing here? You know, why is it that there is something rather than nothing? So where did this come from? What's going on here in a fundamental sense? That's the cosmological question. The second of them is called the teleological question. The teleological question is the question of how is our universe unfolding? Is it unfolding in some systematic way towards some particular end objective? You know, is it, for example, true that it began in a big bang from an infinitely tiny pinhead-sized density of every single ultimately reducible integer of matter in the entire universe, all compacted together, and then had a big bang, and that it spread out so that all of these integers of matter in the universe are spreading out into the universe, and they're establishing elements and mixtures and compounds, and that each and every one of these elements on the periodic table is disintegrating at the same time, disintegrating into its constituent elements. This is what's known as the half-life of every one of the elements. So that half of all of the mass of a given element, or a given amount of a given element, will disintegrate over a period of time, a set period of time that can be measured, into its constituent elements. And that these are disintegrating and they're expanding out and away from the locus of the Big Bang. They're expanding out and away and disintegrating at the same time. So that pursuant to this theory of teleology of the universe, all of these ultimate integers of matter will eventually disintegrate one from each other, and there will come a point in time when every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire universe which appears at the present time to be an inchoate quantum field, not materially manifest, but an inchoate, non-materially manifest integer, that they will all stand separate and apart from each other. And the question then is whether they will continue to expand out and away from each other when they're standing separate and apart, or whether at that exact microsecond, when every single element in the entire universe has disintegrated into its constituent inchoate quantum fields, that will at that point the impetus that's been imposed upon them from the Big Bang, blowing them out and away from the center of the Big Bang, will that impetus have been, will it expire? It will expire, and what they've discovered is that every single integer of matter in the entire universe is attracted to every other one. Every other integer of matter in the entire universe. They demonstrate this by getting into a huge auditorium, and they suspend a little tiny wooden ball from a very thin carborundum wire, and then they go clear to the other end of the auditorium, and they suspend a big, huge wooden ball from a carborundum wire. And then they release the two balls, and what happens is the little ball will move toward the big ball. They're not metal, it's not magnetism, it's the actual attraction of the matter for each other. Now the big ball actually moves too, but it's so infinitesimally small it's hard to measure, but they can see the little ball move. So this is in fact one of the laws that function inside our universe, that every single integer of matter in the entire universe is attracted to every other integer, and the degree of attraction is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. Now, we all remember that one thing we had to memorize one time in high school physics, and that was that law, is that they're all attracted to each other, and it's inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them, but it's still there. So pursuant to one particular teleological theory, when all the impetus of the expansion of the Big Bang is expended and expired, there will be a moment of stasis in which the impetus outward has expired, but the bonding attraction will continue. And so therefore, they start to move back toward each other again, and they start to reassemble. The quarks start to reassemble, or the inchoate quantum fields, into quarks and mesons and neutrinos and electrons and neutrons and protons and elements and mixtures and star systems and galaxies, etc. But in this phase, they're all contracting. They're all moving forever tighter and tighter together until they all eventually get down to a moment where every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire universe is in direct physical contact with every other one. And at that exact moment, smaller than the head of a pin, the polarity reverses, and every single one of them repels every other single one of them. Not just an explosion from the center outward, but every single one of them immediately repels every other one, generating another Big Bang. Okay, this is known as the oscillating universe theory. Okay, but there's another theory that, in fact, that when every single integer is separate and apart from each other, they'll continue to expand out and away forever, and everything will disappear. There will be no thing left in the universe. This is the theory of entropy in the universe. So that there are various teleological theories of the unfolding of our universe once you answer the question as to how it got here to begin with. Okay? And then there is a third one, a third pillar question, and this is called the ontological question. The ontological question is, how did consciousness arise? Assuming you get this matter in the universe expanding and contracting or expanding into nothingness, how does consciousness arise out of this process? And how does, in fact, a certain combination of these inchoate quantum fields, when they come together, how is it that they become conscious as an entity? Somehow they have a sense of themselves as an entity, whether or not it's a single-celled amoeba, or whether it's a little bacterium, or whether it's a squirrel or a fish or a whale. You know, how is it that they gather a consciousness of themselves as a separate entity so that they can actually motivate and do things, that they can send signals to every single part of their combination of cells and do stuff? How does that happen? You know, and so this is the ontological question, the source and nature of consciousness, of the entification of matter. Okay? And the last of the four pillar questions is what they call the epistemological question. The epistemological question is just another great big word for trying to figure out what are the means that we as human beings, this is an important question now when you're talking about another extraterrestrial civilization, what are the means that we as Homo sapien, what are the means that we have at our disposal by means of which we can possibly answer questions like this? Are we confined to gathering data simply through our five senses? If you see it and taste it and smell it and weigh it and hear it, are these the only means we have of ascertaining data? Even with amplification through telescopes or microscopes or amplification of sound. These are still, are we confined to our five senses to take in data as the means by which we can determine what the answer to these questions are? This is the epistemological question. And what they've come to determine is that if in fact you answer all four of these pillar questions in a way that each answer is completely internally and self-referentially consistent with the other three, it will generate a particular principle, a common principle. And this common principle, if you apply that principle to all of the other questions in life that occur during the course of a lifetime, if you apply this principle and answer the questions that are posed to you with the operation of that principle, you have a consistent philosophy. Okay? Now, the challenge is that most people don't think very clearly about any one of these four things consciously. But they kind of come to a kind of an unconscious feeling about it. Most of the time, the answers are internally inconsistent with each other. And so they get this completely garbled set of principles that are not consistent with each other. So they make decisions that are incompatible with each other, and their life is kind of chaotic. Okay? But now there are a certain number of people who are very disciplined, usually very intelligent, usually well-schooled, who know enough to try to answer these questions in a way that's internally self-referentially consistent, and those people come up with a simple principle. And when they apply that principle to all of the questions that occur in the normal course of a lifetime, they come up with an entire systematic philosophy. And what they discovered is that this is what generates the spectrum of human worldviews. And this spectrum of human worldviews that Talcott Parsons identified, he said that these 5 different nodal points on the spectrum of human beliefs, that they range from what he referred to as the right systematists and the left systematists. You'll notice these aren't terribly helpful. And then the right marginalists and the left marginalists and the middle marginalists. All he did is he camped them together through inductive experiments. He sent out students in his sociology department over 40 years, interviewing tens of thousands of people, asking them sets of questions, and to determine whether they answered the questions in a systematically consistent way or not. And those that did, he found broke into these 5 different categories. My master's work that I was doing actually led me to believe that there are 2 others, which are the right middle marginalists and the left middle marginalists, which are your classic conservatives and your liberals. Okay, that these are the two that were left out. But you have your authoritarians here. Your authoritarians are right systematists. Your reactionaries are your right marginalists. Your conservatives are your right middle marginalists. Your moderates are here in the middle, your middle marginalists. Your liberals are your left middle marginalists. Your progressives are down here in your left marginalists. And here you have your utopianists. Okay? Here are your that you hear bantied around all the time. That's a liberal, they're a conservative, this person's a reactionary, or what a fascist this person is, or this person's a commie, But these are the categories. These are the actual scholastic categories into which our human family divides itself over these issues. And what you will discover is that when you pose this question about extraterrestrial intelligence or about the UFOs to a person in our human family, they will answer the question pursuant to their worldview. So that when you ask someone in the national security state what they think about a UFO, they will say, my God, they're invading our airspace. These people are a threat to the security of our airspace. And they genuinely experience it that way. And they're totally sincere about it. And you ask another person about it, a utopian, and they'll say, oh, these people are all coming to help us. These people are going to come and share their higher technology with us. They're going to get us out of global climate change. We're going to be out of wars. We're going to eliminate the nuclear weapons, and we're all going to live happily ever after. Okay? And then there are, of course, the middle marginalists who keep saying, who knows? Let's get more data. Let's find out more stuff about them and see if somehow out of all this collection of information we get, there wells up some induced set of principles or some induced truth that is induced by the facts. Okay? And so that this is the situation that we're faced with when we are coming to deal with the philosophical questions. And so the philosophical questions that are generated, as I say, that there can be myriad philosophical questions that rise, and you can start to name a whole bunch of them. You can say, for example, is our universe the only universe there is? Are there other universes? That's a cosmological question, okay? But it goes into making up a philosophy. And you can ask other questions like, did these ET beings, did they have a beginning that was earlier than ours? Have they been around longer than we've been? Have they been, for example, did they arise on a red dwarf star that is billions of years older than our star, and it burns much more slowly, but they have to be a little bit closer to it to be as warm as we are near our sun, but it lasts for billions of years more. So they could have, in fact, had their entire civilization for 10 billion years more than us. And so you say, well, what is it they could have figured out in 10 billion years that we don't know yet? Now, and it's absolutely true that you talk to virtually anybody, and they will say, well, that we've figured it out. Our human family has figured it out, that there's this many different systematic worldviews. And what I've pointed out, and I did it in my paper, which caused some stir, is that there's more than 7 of these. There's an 8th worldview. There's an 8th worldview which completes the entire octave. Because as it turns out, we as human beings experience reality as an octave. That you see, red, yellow, green, orange, blue, indigo, and violet. That these are the things we can see within the entire spectrum of electromagnetic wavelengths. Same way with sound. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You get an octave of things that we can hear, but there's ultrasound and sound above what we can hear. And we just don't experience it unless we supplement ourselves with technology. Okay? And so the bottom line is here that there is, I believe, an 8th worldview that will complete our octave, But we have not yet evolved the faculty that is evolving teleologically and progressively over time in our human species. What we are on the brink of course, becomes very important for this community, is the sixth faculty. The sixth faculty is in the process of evolving into full flower in our human family. It is the ESP faculty. It is the faculty by means of which one can telepathically communicate. It is, in fact, the faculty by means of which you can engage in remote viewing. This is the faculty by means of which you can engage in projecting the future. You can actually project the future. You can see things happening in the future. Because all of reality is one solid piece going on all at the same time. Okay? So that there is right now, we only have the epistemological set of assumptions. I don't know what that said, but I hope okay. What I'm saying is that what we find ourselves right now in the throes of evolving our sixth faculty out of a set of 8. Because we have not only the 7 chakras, the 7 chakras that you're so familiar with, but there's an 8th chakra that abides right above the head, right here, and it's at the apex of the energy field that surrounds our body that is generated by our other chakras. Each of the chakras generates a field of energy around our body that's of a particular frequency, vibrational frequency, and it envelops our body, and there are 7 of these things functioning right now, but the fact of the matter is there's an 8th chakra above that resides at the very top of this envelope of vibrational frequencies that we're encased in. And the reality is that each of us perceives reality through the prism of these particular vibrational frequencies that surround our body. And this is what causes you to perceive reality in a different way from other people. And you perceive the reality usually in accordance with these nodal points. And it has to do with the vibrational frequency at which your chakras are actually vibrating. And as you probably heard, is that there's all kinds of insights in the Hindus and the Buddhists, etc., and even Trappist monks that believe that you can actually, through meditative exercises, can access the chakras in your body. And you can actually speed up or slow down the vibrational frequency of your chakras. And the chakras also rotate inside your body. And they also have a particular pitch to the ecliptic. And that all of these are capable of being controlled by your consciousness. And that way you can control the vibrational frequencies of the envelopes around your body. And if you can open your 8th chakra, you can communicate with the extraterrestrials. Because as it turns out, they are probably in the next octave of being. And that their lowest chakra may be our 8th chakra. They may exist in an entire other octave of vibrational frequency to us. And they have figured out a way through this type of rheostat to slow down their vibrational frequency so they can sort of pop into our spectrum of perception. And they can pop out as well. And they exist in a vibrational dimension, a parallel area, which is just beyond our direct immediate perception. And that they can pop back and forth in this. And this may be how they travel actually at what we refer to as superluminal speed. That they can actually leave a star system and pop up here in our galaxy, in our star system, and manifest in the spectrum of vibrational frequencies that we can perceive. All of this is an 8th paradigm worldview. And this is the worldview that we have to start preparing our human family for. Now, the reality is there's still problems with the 7 worldviews that we have. And one is going to immediately rush to the conclusion that, well, obviously, the higher your vibrational frequency is, the better. that these people are better than these people. But the fact of the matter is, without a root chakra, none of us would be here. That we are all survivors. We are all the progeny of beings who have survived in this world under the threat of wild animals, of exposure to the elements, that we are the children, grandchildren, great-great-great-great-grandchildren of beings who were able to survive because of the strength of their first chakra. They cling to life out of that first chakra. It is the root chakra that holds you in the material manifestation and holds you to the earth, makes you part of the earth, makes you a kin of the earth. Because the fact of the matter is, it appears that our earth generates life. Generates life. Which is one of the things that the ETs keep telling us. You people are not entitled to destroy this planet. You are not entitled to have a thermonuclear war that destroys the life systems. You are not allowed to pump fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere, which destroys your entire climatic system and poisons and kills the life-generating capability of this planet, because there aren't that many of them. There aren't that many of them. That's not to indulge the fantasy that we're the only ones, that we're the unique thing in the entire universe, which we've spent a million years thinking. But the fact of the matter is, the likelihood is that planets that actually gestate life in our galaxy are comparatively rare. That's part of the reason why they're here. That's part of the reason that they're coming. That's part of the reason that they're trying to supplicate us to get a handle on what we're doing to ourselves. And they're trying to help us by raising our consciousness. Okay? Now, but there's an obligation that we have, because the simple fact is, not all species are destined to survive. So don't get carried away with our self-importance here. Okay? But I happen to be biased on this issue. I happen to view our human family as a great client. A great client for me to have, to try to help talk among ourselves, to stimulate the conversation so that we can know what to say when, in fact, they appear and they say, what have you got to say for yourself? And so we have to start answering those questions. How do we explain the fact that some of our people all act differently when confronted with the same problems? How do we explain ourselves that we still suffer from certain types of completely instinctive, unreflecting, uncompassionate reactions to each other? I mean, and given the fact that they've told you about this, that there are other prophets that have told you about this. There's Gandhi, there's the Buddha, there's Jesus, there's all these different prophets that have been around for thousands of years telling us about this. They've said it over and over again. And the fact of the matter is, like other mutations that occur prior to the time when the environment is prepared for them to survive, they are consumed by the system that is not prepared for them. That's what I believe. I believe that there's a teleological phenomenon going inside our human species. I believe that, like the Buddha and others, Jesus and others, had a faculty, the sixth faculty, that was fully evolved. And for that reason, they knew about the vibrational dimensions. That's why Jesus could say, here is this bread. Here, if you know that this bread is made up of the same stuff that my body is made up of, and that this wine is made up of the same stuff that my blood is made up of, you will know who I am. And I have come to share this with you so that you will know who you are. But you have to work at this. You have to spend the time paying attention to this. Okay? Because the time has arrived now where we are on the brink of destroying ourselves. Okay? And we're all participating in this. It's not just the 1% that are all reaping the values of this. We all drive cars that still use the gas, and we still have electricity that is generated by the fossil fuels. We all have to start disciplining ourselves. What I'm trying to do is to put forth in the Green New Deal a whole set of specific programs that if we consciously adopt these programs collectively, we can turn back the threat of global climate change. I had and helped participate in the conversations with Gorbachev to get Gorbachev to agree to start disassembling the nuclear warheads. I mean, I had Jimmy Garrison, who was in my staff at the Jesuit headquarters in charge of the nuclear proliferation division. He's the one that went to Russia, went to the Soviet Union, and met first with Brezhnev's people, then with Andropov's people, and eventually with Gorbachev to get him to cut back on the nuclear warheads, trying to get our United States government to respond by cutting back on our warheads. This is the kind of thing that we need to do. These are not hard questions if you, in fact, come from the proper place. And you have to come from a place of compassion. You have to come from a place of love for our human species. And you have to have an openness to all of the people in all of the different worldviews to come to understand what it is that each contributes to our human family. Because you remember that if you take laser lights, laser beams of each of the primary colors, of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, if you take all of the laser light of that and you shine it onto a single point, they will set up an interference pattern that generates white light. Every single one of those colors is essential to the generation of white light. And so you can't demonize any one of them. You just have to get them to have their appropriate role in the decision making that goes on. So this is the message that I wanted to bring to you tonight, because we want to work together to identify what the philosophical questions are, not just willy-nilly haphazard questions, but systematic questions that are of a philosophical nature. And the philosophical questions are questions that have to do with what is going on inside the parameters of the sum total of mass and energy, that is the sum total of the inchoate quantum fields, which, remember, are a finite number that exist inside the confines of our universe. And all of the questions that we ask about how these things interrelate with each other and how they teleologically unfold and how we can discern them, etc., all of these questions are philosophical questions. The theological questions start to arise when you ask how all of this stuff started. Has this been going on absolutely forever? Does in fact our universe expand out and disintegrate to the point where every ultimately irreducible unit of matter in the entire universe is separate and apart? And do they in fact then continue to expand out and disappear entirely, so that there is nothing but an infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness? And does that sea of consciousness make a decision to turn once again to generating a discontinuity in the infinite field of completely undifferentiated consciousness, so as to start the process over again? That there is a discontinuity, and that the two nodes of the discontinuity generate a bonding attempt for each other and generate the first wave of energy, and that they then disappear. This is how quantum fields do. They manifest as a wave of energy, then disappear completely out of the material realm, and then manifest either again as a wave of energy or as a Higgs boson particle and an incipient node of mass, and then blink out of existence again, blink out of material existence again. And they blink on and off and on and off. And what they've discovered, this is extraordinarily important, what was discovered back between 1923 and 1926 is that this happens at a completely random pattern. There's a completely randomness about whether it manifests as a particle of mass or a wave of energy, unless there is human intention directed to the inchoate quantum field. And if you direct human intention to an inchoate quantum field, it will manifest either as a wave of energy or a particle of mass, in a way that is statistically significant in accordance with the intention. This goes to show the unique role that our human species has here in dealing with the manifestation of material reality. This is part of the worldview that is the eighth paradigm worldview. It is a great secret that may be known by the extraterrestrials, that the directing of intention to the inchoate field of multiple possibilities in the quantum realm that collapse all of those multiple possibilities into one particular manifest reality is directly correlative to the intention of the viewer. These are fundamental concepts that we need to come to talk about. We need to figure out how to systematically address these, and we need to be able to get answers to these questions so that we're prepared not to talk the executive branch of the CIA or the DIA or the To the Stars Academy, to the extent to which they're different, into revealing the existence of an extraterrestrial civilization, nor do we have to coax the extraterrestrials into saying, okay, look, we're ready now, come and tell us. What we need to do is demonstrate that we're able to know that we need to participate in evolving beyond our sixth faculty, our seventh faculty, and our eighth faculty, so that we develop these other human worldviews, so that we can have the full octave of worldviews functioning collectively as a human family. This is what we need to do. And so I just come here this evening to ask you to participate in this process. I know that this particular society of UFOs and the Paranormal Research Society are dedicated to this, and so that you have a special role. I've begun cases that have resulted in shutting down all the new nuclear power plants in the entire country, stopping the flow of weapons to the Contras, one thing, cutting off the military supply to the Shah of Iran. I've done all these things in a room with far fewer people in it than this tonight. Okay? So what you need to do is you need to understand that this is a crisis that we're in. And in order to deal with a crisis, you have to first come to grips with the knowledge that it is a crisis, that our human family is on the brink of having disastrous consequences imposed upon ourselves. There are 400 nuclear power plants operative within 2 miles of the seacoasts of our planet. And all of the major scientists of the United Nations and the United States, all 13 government agencies, have all stated that the global greenhouse gas effect is generating an increase in the mean sea levels of the planet, and that they can inundate these nuclear power plants. We could have 400 of Fukushimas on our hands pouring radioactive waste into the oceans, from just the rise of the sea level by 2 or 3 feet. These are things that are hard to grasp, but the extraterrestrial civilization isn't coming to save us. They're simply trying to warn us so that we can take it upon ourselves to solve these problems. And so that's what I'm asking tonight. I know that your mission is similar to what I'm talking about. I'm going to be talking tomorrow night with the people from MUFON about similar issues. But I wanted to come here tonight and put this issue to you. Again, not to have people refrain from the other tasks of figuring out who they are, what their propulsion system is like, whether they present a threat to our national security. These are a discrete set of questions, philosophical, theological, psychological questions that we need to answer. But this group can begin that process and reach out as a group and a community, working with MUFON through them too, to get these questions identified and asked and begin the discussion, to gather groups of citizens together to discuss these issues. And I'll be happy to participate in that. I would appreciate it if you would do it too. Thank you.